I was staring at the inside of an ambulance when I realized my son had tried to kill me. The paramedic was checking Bill Thompson's pulse for the third time, muttering numbers under his breath that didn't sound good. Bill's face had gone the color of wet concrete, and his breathing came in short, desperate gasps that made my chest tighten with guilt I couldn't shake. "What did he smoke exactly?" the paramedic asked, looking straight at me. "Cuban cigars," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Cohibas. I gave them to him yesterday." That's when it hit me like a sledgehammer to the skull. The cigars weren't meant for Bill Thompson. They were meant for me. My name is Harold Winston. I'm 72 years old, and 24 hours ago, I handed my neighbor a box of cigars that nearly stopped his heart. The cigars came from my son Marcus, wrapped in expensive paper with my name written in handwriting I'd recognize in my sleep. Marcus, who hadn't spoken to me in 4 years. Marcus, who knew I'd quit smoking because of my emphysema. Marcus, who also knew I'd give anything I couldn't use to Bill, because that's what neighbors do. The ambulance hit a pothole and Bill's eyes fluttered open. He looked at me with confusion, like he was trying to remember my name or why his lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. "Harry," he whispered, his voice barely there. "What happened to me?" I wanted to tell him it was an accident. I wanted to say someone made a mistake at the cigar shop, or maybe the tobacco went bad, or any lie that would make this easier to swallow. But Bill Thompson had been my friend for 15 years. He'd fixed my electrical panel when it caught fire. He'd helped me bury my wife, Sarah. He'd never asked for anything except maybe a beer on Sunday afternoons and someone to complain about the Diamondbacks with. "I don't know yet," I said, which was the truth. I didn't know yet. But I was starting to suspect, and that suspicion was eating through my gut like battery acid. The paramedic radioed ahead to the hospital. "Possible nicotine poisoning, male, age 69, altered mental status, tachycardia." The hospital doors slammed open, and they wheeled Bill into the emergency room. I followed behind like a man walking to his own execution, my work boots squeaking against the polished floor. For 43 years, those boots had carried me up ladders and through construction sites, wiring houses and office buildings across Phoenix. Now they felt heavy as concrete blocks. I'd met Bill Thompson on my first day working for Henderson Electric back in 1979. He was the crew chief, 10 years older than me, with hands like leather and a laugh that could shake scaffolding. We'd spent decades running wire through Arizona heat, sharing lunch breaks in whatever shade we could find, complaining about foremen and celebrating paychecks. When I bought the house on Maple Street in 1985, Bill was already living 3 doors down with Martha. When he retired 5 years before I did, he'd wave from his front porch every morning as I headed to work. Bill was the kind of neighbor who noticed things. If your newspaper sat in the driveway past 8 in the morning, he'd knock on your door to make sure you were breathing. When Martha had her gallbladder surgery 2 years ago, he learned to cook so he could bring me casseroles I'd actually eat. And every Friday evening, weather permitting, we'd sit on his back porch with a beer and whatever cigars he'd picked up that week. Arturo Fuente Romeo y Julieta, nothing too expensive, just good tobacco and better conversation. Marcus was different. 29 years old with a computer science degree from Arizona State and ideas bigger than his bank account. He'd started 3 different tech companies in the past 6 years, each one promising to revolutionize something I'd never heard of. Blockchain logistics, AI-powered marketing analytics, cryptocurrency mining operations. The words sounded impressive until you realized they all meant the same thing, burning through investor money, until the investors got tired of burning. Sarah had died 5 years ago, lung cancer that spread faster than wildfire through dry brush. 38 years of marriage ended in a hospice room that smelled like disinfectant and defeat. She'd smoked for 20 years before quitting, back when doctors still recommended cigarettes for stress relief. By the time she quit, the damage was done. The cancer took her piece by piece until there wasn't enough left to fight with. That's when I stopped smoking too. Not because of some dramatic revelation, but because lighting a cigar reminded me of watching Sarah struggle to breathe. The pulmonologist confirmed what I already suspected a year later. Emphysema early stages, probably from secondhand smoke and decades of construction dust. Not fatal if I was careful. Definitely fatal if I wasn't. Marcus had been there for Sarah's funeral dressed in a black suit that cost more than my monthly Social Security check. He'd stood beside me at the graveside, shaking hands with neighbors and co-workers, accepting condolences like he actually cared. But I caught him checking his phone during the eulogy, and when Bill offered to help with the reception afterward, Marcus suggested we hire caterers instead. The trouble started 2 years later, when Marcus's latest startup imploded. Something about peer-to-peer lending platforms and regulatory compliance issues I didn't pretend to understand. What I understood was the phone call at midnight, Marcus asking for $150,000 to keep his company alive. "It's temporary, Dad. Just until we secure the next round of funding." I'd been supporting myself on pension payments and Social Security for 3 years by then. The house was paid off, but $150,000 might as well have been $1 million. "I don't have that kind of money, son." "You could get it. The house is worth $600,000. Take out a mortgage." "I'm 72 years old, Marcus. No bank is going to give me a mortgage." "Then sell it. Move into one of those senior living places. You'd be happier." That's when I realized he wasn't asking for a loan. He was asking me to liquidate my life so he could gamble with the proceeds. When I said no, Marcus stopped calling. When I tried calling him, the phone went straight to voicemail. 4 years of silence followed, broken only by the occasional Facebook post showing him at expensive restaurants or tech conferences I couldn't afford to attend. The package arrived yesterday morning while I was drinking coffee and reading about the Diamondbacks' latest losing streak. UPS truck in the driveway, driver with a clipboard and a cedar box that looked like it belonged in a tobacco shop display case. No return address, just my name written in handwriting, I recognized immediately. Inside were 5 Cuban cigars, Cohiba Bahaik 56, arranged like precious artifacts in custom foam padding. The smell hit me first, rich tobacco and cedar wood, the kind of aroma that used to make my mouth water. Each cigar was wrapped in tissue paper with a small card explaining the blend, the aging process, the careful attention to detail that justified the $85 price tag. I held one up to the light, admiring the perfect construction, the oily wrapper leaf that promised hours of complex flavor. For about 30 seconds, I forgot about my lungs and remembered what it felt like to anticipate something beautiful. Then reality crashed back. I couldn't smoke these, wouldn't smoke these, but throwing them away felt like sacrilege and keeping them felt like torture. Bill would appreciate them. Bill understood cigars the way some people understand wine or art. He'd smoke them slowly, savoring each one, probably calling me afterward to discuss the flavor profile and construction quality. He'd make them into an experience instead of letting them turn into regret. I walked the 3 blocks to Bill's house, the humidor tucked under my arm like a peace offering. He answered the door in weekend clothes, coffee mug in one hand, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. "Harry, what's the occasion?" "Birthday present from Marcus," I said, opening the box. Figured you'd get more use out of them than I would. Bill's eyes went wide. "Jesus, Harry, these are Cohibas, Cuban Cohibas. Where the hell did Marcus get Cuban cigars?" I didn't ask. He lifted one out carefully, like he was handling a museum piece. This is probably a $200 cigar. Then make it worth $200. The phone was ringing when I got home. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code. Phoenix. Dad, it's me. Marcus's voice casual as a weather report. Happy birthday. Did you get my gift? Did you try one yet? Marcus asked, and something in his tone made the hair on my neck stand up. No, I said, settling into my kitchen chair. You know I can't smoke anymore. Right. The emphysema. He paused. So what did you do with them? Gave them to Bill Thompson. Figured he'd appreciate them more than I would. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice different somehow. Flatter. You gave them to Bill. That's what neighbors do, son. Share good things. Huh. Another pause. Well, I hope he enjoys them. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a full minute, replaying the conversation in my head. Something about it felt wrong, like a machine part that looked right but didn't quite fit. Why would Marcus care whether I'd tried the cigars, and why did his voice change when I mentioned Bill? 22 hours later, I had my answer. Martha's call came at 6:15 in the morning, her voice high and panicked in a way that made my blood run cold. Harry, something's wrong with Bill. He's in the bathroom throwing up and his heart is racing like he ran a marathon. I'm calling an ambulance. I was in my truck before she finished talking, still wearing yesterday's clothes, and the kind of fear that makes your hands shake on the steering wheel. The 3 blocks to their house felt like 30 miles of bad road. The ambulance was already there when I pulled up, red and blue lights painting the neighborhood in emergency colors. Through the front window I could see paramedics working on someone lying on the living room floor. Martha stood on the porch in her nightgown clutching her cell phone like a lifeline. What happened? I asked, but I already knew the answer was going to gut me. He smoked one of those cigars last night, she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. After dinner out on the back porch like he always does. About an hour later he started feeling sick. Nauseous, dizzy, his heart pounding so hard I could see his shirt moving. They brought Bill out on a stretcher, oxygen mask over his face, IV line already running into his arm. His skin was gray and slick with sweat, and his eyes rolled around like he couldn't focus on anything. When he saw me, he tried to say something, but the mask muffled the words. Possible nicotine overdose, one paramedic told the other as they loaded him into the ambulance. Vitals are all over the place. Nicotine overdose. From a cigar. From a Cuban cigar my son had sent me for my birthday. I rode in the ambulance because Martha was too shaky to drive, and because I needed to hear every word the paramedics said. Bill's blood pressure was through the roof. His heart rate jumped between 90 and 140 like it couldn't decide what rhythm to follow. His breathing was shallow and rapid, like he'd forgotten how to use his lungs properly. How much did he smoke? The lead paramedic asked me. Maybe half a cigar. He's not a heavy smoker, just weekends usually. This doesn't look like normal cigar smoking. These symptoms suggest acute nicotine poisoning. Someone his age with his blood pressure, this could have been fatal if he'd finished the whole thing. Fatal. The word hit me like a physical blow. Bill Thompson, who'd helped me wire half the houses in Phoenix, who'd been the best man at my wedding, who'd held my hand at Sarah's funeral, almost died because I gave him a birthday present from my son. A birthday present that was supposed to be for me. Dr. Patel met us in the emergency room with the kind of expression that meant she'd seen this before, and it never ended well. She was young, maybe 35, with dark eyes that missed nothing, and the confidence that comes from saving lives on a regular basis. Mr. Winston, I need to ask you some specific questions about these cigars, she said, pulling up a chair beside Bill's bed. The blood work shows nicotine levels that are medically impossible from normal smoking. Martha gripped my arm like she was afraid I might collapse too. What do you mean impossible? A typical cigar contains about 15 milligrams of nicotine. Mr. Thompson's blood shows levels consistent with consuming over 200 milligrams in a short period. That's enough to kill a healthy adult, let alone someone with hypertension. The numbers hit me like a series of gut punches. 200 milligrams, enough to kill. Bill Wade, maybe 170, had been smoking cigars for 30 years, knew his limits. There was no way he'd consumed that much nicotine by accident. "Doctor," I said, my voice sounding strange in my own ears, "I need to see those cigars again." She frowned. "The remaining cigars are evidence now, Mr. Winston. I've already called the police." Police. The word made everything real in a way that hospital machines and blood tests hadn't. This wasn't a medical emergency anymore. This was attempted murder. Detective Rodriguez arrived 40 minutes later, a compact man in his 50s with gray hair and the kind of steady presence that made you want to tell him the truth even when it hurt. He introduced himself to Martha and me, then spent 20 minutes talking to Dr. Patel in medical language I couldn't follow. When he finally approached us, he had a notebook in one hand and an evidence bag in the other. "Mr. Winston, I understand these cigars came from your son, Marcus. He sent them for my birthday yesterday, and you gave them to Mr. Thompson because you can't smoke due to a medical condition, emphysema, 4 years now." Rodriguez made notes. "Has your son ever given you tobacco products before?" "Never. We haven't spoken in 4 years, not since he asked me for money I didn't have." The detective's pen stopped moving. "How much money?" "150,000, to save his company. And when you refused, he stopped calling, stopped visiting. Yesterday was the first contact I'd had with him since then." Rodriguez exchanged a look with Dr. Patel. "Mr. Winston, I'd like you to come down to the station tomorrow morning. We need a formal statement, and I want to show you something." "What kind of something?" "Security footage from Desert Premium Tobacco. Your son purchased these cigars 3 days ago, along with some other items we need to discuss." The drive home felt like traveling through a different city, one where familiar streets had been rearranged by malevolent hands. Martha insisted on following me back to my house, and I was grateful for the company. Walking into that kitchen alone, seeing the empty space where the humidor had been, would have been too much. She made coffee while I sat at the table staring at nothing. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear, but from rage, so pure it felt like electricity in my veins. "He tried to kill you," Martha said quietly, setting a mug in front of me. "Yeah, his own father." "Yeah, for money." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Martha sat down across from me with her own coffee. "Harry, there's something else. Something I didn't tell the doctor." I looked up at her. "Last week, Bill saw Marcus at Home Depot, in the garden center, looking at pesticides and fertilizers. Bill said hello, tried to make conversation, but Marcus acted like he didn't recognize him, just walked away." "Why didn't you mention this before?" "Because it seemed petty. Like maybe Marcus was embarrassed about the family situation, didn't want to deal with neighbors asking awkward questions." She shook her head. "But now it sounds like he was shopping for supplies." My phone buzzed. Text message from an unknown number. "Dad heard about Bill. Hope he's okay. We should talk." I showed the message to Martha. Her face went white. "He knows," she whispered. "Yeah, he knows." Another text arrived 30 seconds later. "Coffee tomorrow, Starbucks on Central, 10 a.m. Just you and me." I stared at the screen, at words from someone who'd tried to murder me 12 hours earlier, and was now suggesting we meet for coffee like nothing had happened. Like Bill Thompson wasn't fighting for his life because of cigars that should have killed me instead. Martha reached across the table and took my phone. "You're not going." "No," I said. "I'm not." But I was going to text him back. And I was going to let Detective Rodriguez know exactly where my son wanted to meet. Detective Rodriguez called me at 7:30 the next morning, his voice sharp with the kind of urgency that meant he'd been up all night working my case. "Mr. Winston, we need to talk before you do anything else today. Can you be at the station in an hour?" "What did you find?" "More than I expected. Just get down here." The Phoenix Police Department building looked like every government office I'd ever been inside. Fluorescent lights, beige walls, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with desperation. Rodriguez led me to a small conference room where manila folders and computer printouts covered a table like puzzle pieces waiting to be assembled. "Your son is busy. he said, opening the first folder. Security footage from Desert Premium Tobacco shows him purchasing 5 Cohiba cigars, 10 syringes, and asking specifically about liquid nicotine concentrate for vaping supplies. He slid a printed screenshot across the table. Marcus had a counter credit card in hand, talking to a clerk who looked uncomfortable with the conversation. The clerk remembers him because he asked weird questions, wanted to know about injection techniques for flavoring cigars, claimed he was starting a boutique tobacco business. When she suggested he contact a professional blender, he said he preferred the hands-on approach. Another folder opened. Bank records, credit card statements, phone logs, numbers and dates that painted a picture I didn't want to see. Your son has been researching nicotine toxicity for 3 months, Rodriguez continued. Library computer records show searches for lethal dosages, absorption rates through lung tissue symptoms of acute poisoning. He's also been monitoring your medical records. My medical records, hacked into your doctor's patient portal using your birthday and social security number. Downloaded everything related to your emphysema diagnosis medication, lists emergency contact information. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were closing in. Marcus hadn't just decided to kill me on impulse. He'd been planning it for months, studying my condition, calculating the exact amount of poison needed to stop my heart, without leaving obvious traces. There's more, Rodriguez said. Financial records show he owes over $200,000 to private investors, people who don't accept late payments or payment plans. His rent is 3 months overdue, credit cards, maxed out car about to be repossessed. So this was about money. This was about survival. Your life insurance policy pays $500,000 to your next of kin. Your house is worth $650,000. Add in savings and retirement accounts, your son was looking at over $1 million if you died of natural causes. Natural causes. Emphysema patient smoking a cigar having a heart attack. Who would question that? Who would think to test for nicotine poisoning in a man who'd smoked for 40 years before his diagnosis? He wants to meet me for coffee this morning, I said. Rodriguez leaned forward. I know. We intercepted his text messages. He's planning to gauge how much you suspect, maybe convince you that giving the cigars to Bill was an accident he couldn't have predicted. What do you want me to do? Wear a wire. Meet him. Let him talk. People who plan murders for 3 months usually can't resist explaining how clever they've been, especially when they think they're about to get away with it. My phone buzzed. Another text from Marcus. Running late, can we make it 11, same place? Rodriguez smiled grimly. He's nervous. Probably spent the night trying to figure out how much Bill might remember, whether the doctors found anything suspicious. The longer he has to think about it, the more likely he is to make mistakes. And if he gets suspicious, if he figures out I'm working with you, then we arrest him right there. We have enough evidence for attempted murder already. But if he confesses to premeditation, to targeting you specifically, that's the difference between 15 years and life in prison. I looked at the photographs, the bank records, the computer searches. 3 months of planning to murder his own father. Not in a moment of rage or desperation, but carefully, methodically, like a business transaction. Give me the wire, I said. The wire felt like a spider crawling across my chest as I walked into the Starbucks on Central Avenue. Rodriguez had taped it just below my collarbone, hidden under a flannel shirt that Martha had ironed for me that morning. She'd kissed my cheek before I left, like she was sending me off to war. Marcus was already there, sitting at a corner table with his back to the wall and a clear view of every entrance. 4 years had changed him. His hair was shorter, his face thinner, and he wore the kind of expensive, casual clothes that screamed financial desperation disguised as success. Dad, he said, standing to hug me like we were a normal father and son meeting for a normal conversation. I let him do it. Felt his arms around me, smelled his cologne, and underneath it, something else. Fear, maybe, or guilt. The wire pressed against my ribs as he squeezed, and for a crazy second I wondered if he could feel it through my shirt. You look good, he said, sitting back down. Retirement suits you. Does it? I took the chair across from him, noting the way his eyes darted to the other customers, the exits, the baristas behind the counter. How's Bill doing? I heard he had some kind of medical emergency. The question sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced it in the mirror. I kept my voice steady the way Rodriguez had coached me. He's stable. Doctors say it was nicotine poisoning. Marcus frowned, a perfect performance of concern and confusion. Nicotine poisoning from cigars. From the cigars you sent me. The ones I gave to him because I can't smoke anymore. Dad, that's... He shook his head. That's impossible. Those were premium cigars, top quality. I bought them from a reputable dealer. Which dealer? Desert Premium Tobacco. Downtown. They specialize in authentic Cuban imports. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Are you sure it was nicotine poisoning? Maybe Bill had a reaction to something else, a medication interaction, or food allergy. The blood work was definitive. Someone injected liquid nicotine into those cigars, about 200 milligrams worth. I watched his face carefully, looking for the tell Rodriguez had warned me about. The micro-expression that would give him away. What I saw was better than I'd hoped for. Marcus smiled. Not a big smile, just a tiny upward twitch at the corner of his mouth that lasted maybe half a second. But it was there, and it told me everything I needed to know about my son. 200 milligrams, he repeated. That's a lot. Enough to kill someone. If they smoked the whole cigar, maybe. But Bill didn't, right? He just had a few puffs. How do you know that? The question hung between us like smoke from a gun barrel. Marcus realized his mistake immediately, but it was too late to take it back. I assumed. I mean, if he'd smoked the whole thing, he'd be dead, right? Right. So whoever poisoned those cigars knew exactly how much Bill would smoke. Knew his habits, his limits. Knew he'd stop after a few puffs and get sick instead of dying. Marcus's coffee sat untouched in front of him, steam rising like incense at a funeral. His hands were perfectly still on the table, but I could see a vein pulsing in his neck. Dad, what are you saying? I'm saying whoever did this wasn't trying to kill Bill Thompson. They were trying to kill me. That's crazy. Is it? I'm 72 years old with emphysema. If I'd smoked one of those cigars, I'd have been dead in 20 minutes. Heart attack, respiratory failure, pick your cause. And who would question it, old man with lung disease smoking Cuban cigars against doctor's orders? Natural causes. Marcus picked up his coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about insurance money, $500,000, plus the house savings retirement accounts, over $1 million total. You think I tried to kill you for money? The hurt in his voice was perfect Oscar-worthy, but his eyes were calculating, weighing options, looking for an exit strategy. I think you've been planning this for months, I said. I think you researched nicotine toxicity, hacked my medical records, studied my habits, until you knew exactly how to make it look like an accident. That's insane. You're my father. I love you. You haven't spoken to me in 4 years. Because you wouldn't help me when I needed it most. There it was. The admission Rodriguez had been hoping for. So you decided to help yourself, I said. Marcus set down his coffee cup with the careful precision of a man who knew he was walking a tightrope over an abyss. I don't know what you want me to say, Dad. I sent you a birthday gift. I'm sorry Bill got hurt, but that's not my fault. That's yours for giving away something that was meant for you. Something that was meant to kill me. Something that was meant to show you I still cared. We stared at each other across the small table, and for a moment I saw the boy I'd raised. The kid who'd helped me wire Christmas lights, who'd asked me to teach him to drive, who'd cried when his mother died. But that boy was gone, replaced by someone who could smile while discussing how much nicotine it took to stop a human heart. I reached across the table and put my hand over Marcus's the way I used to when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms. Son, I said quietly, I need you to understand something. Those cigars were poisoned. Bill Thompson almost died. And if I'd smoked one instead of giving them away, you'd be planning my funeral right now instead of sitting here lying to my face. Marcus tried to pull his hand away, but I held on. The police know everything. The security footage from the tobacco shop. Your internet searches the financial records. They know you've been planning this for months. His face went white. Police! Detective Rodriguez is probably listening to every word we're saying right now. Marcus yanked his hand free and looked around the coffee shop like he was seeing it for the first time. The businessman at the next table reading his newspaper. The young mother with her laptop near the window. The maintenance worker in coveralls drinking black coffee by the door. "You're wearing a wire," he whispered. "I'm trying to save your life," I said. "If you run, they'll hunt you down. If you lawyer up and stay quiet, maybe you get 15 years instead of life. But if you keep lying, if you keep pretending this was some kind of accident..." I let the sentence hang unfinished. Marcus stood up fast enough to knock over his chair. Coffee spilled across the table, soaking into napkins and pooling around his phone. Two customers looked up from their conversations, annoyed by the noise. "This is entrapment," he said loud enough that people started staring. "This is attempted murder," I replied. The businessman folded his newspaper and walked toward us, badge already visible in his hand. The young mother closed her laptop and did the same. Even the maintenance worker abandoned his coffee and approached our table. "Marcus Dalton," Detective Rodriguez said, appearing from behind a display case of coffee mugs. "You're under arrest for the attempted murder of Harold Winston and William Thompson." Marcus looked at me one last time, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not anger or fear or even hatred. Just nothing. Like someone had turned off a light switch behind his pupils. "You chose a stranger over your own son," he said, as Rodriguez cuffed his hands behind his back. "No," I said, standing up slowly, feeling every one of my 72 years in my bones. "You chose money over your own father." The trial lasted 3 weeks. Marcus hired an expensive lawyer who argued that the nicotine injection was accidental contamination from a faulty manufacturing process. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Janet Morrison, buried that theory under an avalanche of evidence. Computer searches, financial records, security footage, expert testimony about injection techniques and dosage calculations. I testified on day 12, walking through the events from the birthday package to the coffee shop confession. Marcus stared at me the entire time, but I kept my eyes on the jury. 12 strangers who would decide whether my son spent 15 years in prison or the rest of his life. The most damning evidence was Marcus's own research. Hundreds of internet searches about nicotine toxicity, downloaded medical studies about respiratory failure in emphysema patients, even forum posts asking hypothetical questions about inheritance laws in Arizona. Dr. Patel testified about Bill's condition, explaining how the precise dosage indicated someone with detailed knowledge of pharmacology and human physiology. The tobacco shop clerk identified Marcus from security footage and testified about his unusual questions regarding cigar modification techniques. But the moment that sealed Marcus's fate was when Morrison played the audio from our coffee shop conversation. The courtroom was dead silent as they listened to my son admit that the cigars were meant for me and express no real concern about Bill's near-death experience. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Marcus showed no emotion when the foreman read the verdict. No surprise, no remorse, no acknowledgement that he'd just been convicted of trying to murder his father. He simply nodded once, like the jury had confirmed something he already knew. The judge sentenced him to 25 years without possibility of parole for the first 15. As the bailiff led him away in shackles, Marcus turned back one final time. "I hope the money was worth it, Dad." "What money?" I asked. "The money you'll spend on therapy trying to forget what you did to your own son. That was 4 months ago." Bill recovered completely and bought me a bottle of bourbon for Christmas, which we didn't drink, but kept on the kitchen counter as a reminder that some gifts are meant to be shared with friends instead of opened alone. Martha still brings me casseroles twice a week, and we sit on Bill's back porch every Friday evening talking about baseball and weather and anything except the empty house 3 blocks away where my son used to live. I sleep better now than I have in years. Not because the threat is gone, but because I finally understand the difference between loving someone and enabling them to destroy you. The house feels different now. Not empty exactly, but honest, like it finally stopped pretending to be something it wasn't. I walk through rooms that Sarah and I filled with 40 years of memories, and I don't feel haunted anymore. I feel grateful. Detective Rodriguez stops by once a month, usually with coffee and updates about Marcus's appeals process. They never go anywhere. 25 years is 25 years, and the evidence was too solid for legal technicalities to matter. Rodriguez tells me this is good news, but I've stopped thinking about it in terms of good or bad. It just is. Bill Thompson recovered completely, though he gave up cigars for good. Bourbon's safer, he says, and we both laugh because we know that's not really true. Nothing's safe. Not cigars, not bourbon, not trust, not love. But that doesn't mean you stop living. It just means you pay attention. Martha planted a garden in her backyard, tomatoes and peppers and herbs that smell like hope when the wind is right. She brings me vegetables I can't eat fast enough, and I bring her books I've finished reading. It's a good trade the kind neighbors make when they understand that life is better shared than hoarded. I got a letter from Marcus last month. The first contact since the trial. 3 pages of careful handwriting explaining his side of the story, his financial pressures, his belief that I'd betrayed him first by refusing to help when he needed it most. He asked for forgiveness. He asked me to visit. He asked me to put money in his commissary account so he could buy better food and phone time. I read the letter twice, then filed it in the same box, where I keep Sarah's medical records and the deed to the house. Important documents that belong to the past, but don't need to control the future. Last week, I started volunteering at the senior center, teaching basic electrical safety to people who are trying to maintain their independence in houses that are older than their grandchildren. It's good work, useful work, and it keeps my hands busy while my heart heals. The students ask questions about wiring and circuits and load calculations. Sometimes they ask about family, about children who don't call or visit, about feeling forgotten in a world that moves too fast for people our age. I tell them about wire nuts and junction boxes and the importance of proper grounding. I tell them about checking references before hiring contractors and never paying full price up front. I tell them practical things they can use to keep their houses and their lives running safely. But mostly, I tell them to trust their instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And it's better to be suspicious of someone who loves you than dead because you believed them. Trust broken by family creates the deepest wounds, but protecting yourself isn't betrayal. As we age, our desire to reconcile with estranged children can make us vulnerable to manipulation. Red flags, like unusual expensive gifts, probing questions about health conditions, or sudden contact after years of silence, should never be ignored, even from those we raised. Sometimes love means accepting painful truths about people we care about most. Senior citizens must remember that unconditional love doesn't require unconditional trust. Stay vigilant, maintain boundaries, and don't hesitate to seek help when something feels wrong. Your safety and peace of mind matter more than family harmony built on dangerous ground. Document suspicious behavior, involve authorities when necessary, and trust your instincts over your emotions.